The bride was sent to the wrong castle, but the little vampire girl clung to her hands and whispered, "The moon finally sent you to us." The northern mountains, deep winter. The wind howled through jagged peaks like the keening of something ancient and hungry. Snow fell in relentless curtains, burying the narrow road beneath drifts that swallowed hoofprints within moments. Miles from the nearest village, the frozen wilderness seemed untouched by warmth or mercy, a realm where even moonlight feared to tread. At the edge of that darkness rose a fortress. Annabelle Sinclair clutched her thin traveling cloak tighter, her breath ghosting white in the frigid air as the carriage lurched to a halt. Through the snow-thick wind, she could barely make out the towering silhouette of Winterthorn Keep, its black stone walls rising like teeth against the starless sky, its windows dark and watching. "This is it, miss," the coachman called down, his voice tight with fear. "I'll not stay a moment longer." Before Annabelle could protest, he was already hauling her trunk to the ground, his horses stamping nervously. She stumbled forward through knee-deep snow as the carriage wheels began to turn. "Wait, please," she called out, but the driver whipped the horses into a frantic gallop, vanishing into the blizzard as if pursued by something she could not see. Silence crushed down around her. Annabelle turned back toward the keep, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wind bit through her clothes like frozen claws. She had no choice. She dragged her trunk to the massive iron-bound doors and raised her trembling fist to knock. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung inward. A man stood on the threshold. He was tall, impossibly so, with alabaster skin that seemed to glow faintly, even in shadow. His hair fell white as snow passed his shoulders, whipping in the wind that swirled around his black embroidered coat. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, crimson, sharp, and ancient, studying her as though she were an apparition that had no right to exist. His jaw tightened. His hand rested on the ornate hilt of a blade at his side, and there, on his finger, a silver mourning ring glinted dully in the torchlight. Annabelle forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm Annabelle Sinclair," she said, her words nearly stolen by the wind. "I was sent by the Southern Matrimonial Registry. I am to marry a Lord Edwin Thorne of Briarcliff Manor." The man's eyes narrowed, his expression carved from mice. "My name is Lord Ravian Winterthorn," he said, his voice low and glacial. "And I did not summon a bride." The wind slammed into her back like a hand shoving her forward, but Annabelle held her ground. "There must be a mistake," she said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "The letter said Briarcliff Manor was north of the pass. This is the only keep for 20 miles. "It is," Ravian replied flatly. "But you have come to the wrong castle, Miss Sinclair. There is no Lord Thorne here." He began to turn, the door already moving to close. Annabelle stepped forward. "Please," she said, desperation cracking through her composure. "The storm is worsening, and the carriage has already gone. I have nowhere else to go." Ravian hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then he stepped aside, his movements stiff, deliberate. "You may enter," he said coldly, "but only until the storm passes." She exhaled a shuddering breath, relief flooding through her exhausted body, and crossed the threshold. The warmth inside felt like stepping into a forgotten dream. The great hall of Winterthorn Keep was vast and haunted. Torches flickered along stone walls draped with faded tapestries, their threads depicting moons and wolves and things with too many eyes. Heavy wooden furniture sat arranged around a massive hearth where firelight danced across cold stone. But it was the small details that made her chest ache. A child's wooden doll abandoned near the stairs, a tiny pair of slippers by the fire, and above the mantel, shrouded in dust, a portrait of a woman with dark hair and eyes full of sorrow. Ravian followed her gaze. "She died 3 years ago," he said, his voice brittle as frozen glass. "My wife." Annabelle turned to him, her expression soft but guarded. "I did not come here to replace anyone," she said quietly. "I simply have nowhere else to be." He said nothing, only gestured toward a corridor that disappeared into shadow. "There is a chamber at the end of the hall. You can rest there tonight. At dawn, I will arrange for your departure." She wanted to argue, but exhaustion dragged at her bones like lead weights. She nodded and turned toward the darkened hallway. Then, before she could take another step, a sound stopped them both. Soft footsteps. Out of the shadows near the hearth, a small figure emerged, a child, no more than 5 or 6 years old, barefoot, dressed in a pale nightgown that seemed to float around her like mist. Her hair fell long and dark past her shoulders, tangled and unbrushed. Her face was milk-white, her features delicate and sharp, and when she lifted her eyes to Annabelle, they glowed faintly amber in the firelight, a predator's eyes in a child's face. Ravian went rigid. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, not for his blade, but for steadiness. The girl walked straight toward Annabelle. Not a sound passed her lips. And then tiny, cold fingers reached out and wrapped around Annabelle's wrist, and in a voice that had not been heard for 3 long years, soft, breathless, trembling with something like wonder, the child whispered, "The moon finally sent you to us." The hall went silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Ravian's expression shattered, shock, grief, disbelief colliding across his face. He took a halting step forward. "Celine," he breathed. The little girl said nothing more, but her grip on Annabelle's hands tightened, her small body pressing close to the warmth of a stranger, as though she had found something lost. Ravian knelt slowly, his voice breaking. "She hasn't spoken," he murmured, his red eyes wide and glistening. "Not since." He could not finish. The words were too heavy to carry. Annabelle sank down to meet the child's glowing gaze. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice a balm in the cold air. "My name is Annabelle." The girl looked up, her fangs barely visible past trembling lips. "Are you going to leave too?" she asked, the question barely audible, fragile as frost. Annabelle's heart cracked like ice breaking beneath weight. She touched the child's pale cheek with trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. "Not tonight." Ravian stood frozen in the firelight, his hands clenched at his sides, his ancient eyes filled with something between awe and terror, as though prophecy itself had just walked through his door and taken the shape of a lost bride in a snowstorm. But Annabelle Sinclair did not yet know what she had walked into. She did not know the prophecy whispered through Winterthorn's halls, the curse that chained this child's blood, or the truth behind the woman in the portrait, a woman murdered in her sleep while the castle slept. She did not know that Lord Ravian believed himself a monster, that his sister watched from the shadows with secrets of her own, or that somewhere within these ancient walls, a killer still breathed, waiting. All Annabelle knew, as the little vampire girl held her hands and the storm raged beyond the walls, was that the moon had made a choice, and she had been delivered exactly where she was meant to be. Ravian finally moved, breaking the spell that had frozen them all in place. His voice was carefully controlled when he spoke, though Annabelle could hear the fracture beneath it. "Captain Drake will show you to your chamber," he said, not looking at her. "You may stay one night. In the morning, when the storm clears, I will arrange for your departure." A figure emerged from the shadows near the staircase, a broad-shouldered man with dark hair pulled back severely, his face scarred and weathered. His hand rested on the pommel of a wicked-looking blade, and his gray eyes swept over Annabelle with open suspicion. "This way," Captain Drake said curtly. Celine's fingers tightened around Annabelle's wrist, her amber eyes pleading. "Go back to bed, Celine," Ravian said softly, though he wouldn't meet the child's gaze. "Now." The little girl released Annabelle slowly, reluctantly, then drifted back toward the shadows like a ghost returning to its haunt. But she looked back once, a single glance that carried more weight than any words could, before disappearing into the darkness. Annabelle followed Captain Drake up a winding stone staircase, each step echoing through the hollow keep. The walls were lined with more faded tapestries, their images barely visible in the torchlight, wolves howling at silver moons, figures with elongated shadows, symbols she didn't recognize carved into the stone itself. They stopped before a heavy wooden door at the end of a long corridor. Drake pushed it open without ceremony. "Lock it from the inside," he said flatly, "and don't wander after dark." Before she could ask why, he was already walking away, his footsteps fading into the oppressive silence. The chamber was larger than she expected, a four-poster bed draped in dusty velvet, a fireplace with dying embers, a window that rattled violently as wind hammered against the glass. Annabelle moved to the window and peered out into the storm. The blizzard had intensified. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the glass. The road, if it had ever truly existed, was completely buried now. No one could leave this place. Not tonight. Perhaps not for days. She was trapped. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold crept down her spine. Behind her, something moved. Annabelle spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, but the room was empty. Only shadows cast by the failing fire, dancing across the walls in shapes that seemed almost deliberate. Almost watching. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing herself to breathe. You're exhausted. Nothing more. She began to undress, her fingers stiff and clumsy from the cold, when she heard it. Whispering, faint, barely audible, like voices bleeding through the stone walls themselves. She couldn't make out words, only the cadence of conversation, urgent and low. She pressed her ear to the wall, but the moment she did, the whispering stopped. Silence pressed back against her. Annabelle pulled away, unease coiling in her stomach. She glanced around the room again, and this time noticed something she'd missed before, strange symbols carved into the wooden bedposts. They looked ancient, worn smooth by time, but deliberate. Protective? Or something else? She traced one with her fingertip, and for just a moment, it seemed to pulse with a faint silver light. She jerked her hand back. What is this place? Exhaustion finally overpowered her fear. She crawled beneath the heavy quilts and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. But sleep, when it came, brought no peace. She dreamed of Silverlight. It poured through a window that didn't exist, illuminating a woman standing at the foot of her bed. The woman had dark hair like Celine's, and her face was beautiful and terrible, pale as death, her eyes filled with desperate urgency. Her lips moved, and though Annabelle heard no sound, she understood the words as clearly as if they'd been carved into her bones. Protect my child. Annabelle tried to speak, to ask who she was, but her voice wouldn't come. The woman reached out one translucent hand and vanished. Annabelle woke with a gasp. The room was dark. The fire had died completely. But she wasn't alone. A small shape sat curled at the foot of her bed. Celine? Annabelle whispered. The child said nothing, only crawled forward slowly, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She pressed herself against Annabelle's side, her small body cold as marble, but trembling like a frightened animal. Annabelle's heart broke. She wrapped her arms around the little girl, pulling the quilts over them both. It's all right, sweetheart, she murmured. You're safe. Celine buried her face against Annabelle's shoulder and finally went still, her breathing evening out into something like peace. Annabelle held her, staring up at the ceiling, wondering what she had walked into and why this broken child seemed to recognize something in her that she didn't yet understand. Morning came gray and muted. When Annabelle woke, Celine was gone. Only a cold indentation in the blankets remained. She rose, dressed quickly, and made her way downstairs, following the scent of bread and something bitter, tea, perhaps, or something stronger. She found the great hall occupied by 3 figures. Ravian stood near the hearth, his expression carved from stone. Captain Drake leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with that same hard suspicion. And seated gracefully in a high-backed chair was a woman Annabelle hadn't seen the night before. She was striking, tall and poised, with the same alabaster skin and crimson eyes as Ravian, but her hair was darker, streaked with silver. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, and when she turned her gaze on Annabelle, it was sharp as a blade. Lady Maris Winterthorn, the woman said, rising smoothly. Ravian's sister. And you must be the bride who was not summoned. Annabelle Sinclair, she replied, curtsying instinctively. Maristra's eyes lingered on her, appraising. The storm has worsened, she said. The roads are impassable. You cannot leave today. Perhaps not for several days. Annabelle's stomach sank. I see. You will remain as our guest, Ravian said stiffly, until it is safe to travel. Maristra moved closer, her voice dropping low so only Annabelle could hear. Be careful what the moon chooses, Miss Sinclair. Her crimson eyes gleamed with something like warning, or perhaps prophecy. Its gifts often come with blood. Before Annabelle could respond, Maristra swept past her, leaving only the faint scent of winter roses and something darker, something that smelled of old magic and older grief. Annabelle stood frozen, the words echoing in her mind. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if the mountains themselves were sealing her fate. The storm did not relent. For 2 days, Annabelle remained trapped within Winterthorn Keep's ancient walls, and in those 2 days, she was never alone. Celine followed her everywhere. The child appeared silently in doorways, drifted behind her through corridors, sat watching from corners with those luminous amber eyes. She never spoke again, but her presence was constant, a small shadow that clung to Annabelle like moss to stone. At first, it unnerved her, but gradually, Annabelle began to notice something strange. Whenever Celine drew near, warmth bloomed in Annabelle's chest, a gentle heat that spread through her limbs, chasing away the bone-deep cold that had settled into her since arriving at the keep. And when the child took her hand, which she did often, Annabelle's fingers, always cold, always aching since the illness that had nearly killed her years ago, felt warm. It was impossible, yet it was real. On the third morning, Annabelle found Ravian in the library, a cavernous room lined with books that looked older than kingdoms. He stood before a window, staring out at the endless white, his posture rigid. "Lord Ravian," she said softly. He didn't turn. "You should not be wandering alone." "Celine is with me," Annabelle replied. Indeed, the child stood just behind her, half hidden in the doorway. Ravian's jaw tightened. "She should not be following you like this." "She seems to need it," Annabelle said carefully. "And I don't mind." Finally, he turned to face her. His crimson eyes were shadowed with something that looked like guilt. "You don't understand what you've walked into, Miss Sinclair." "Then help me understand." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he moved to a desk and retrieved a leather-bound book, its cover marked with the same lunar symbols she'd seen carved throughout the keep. He opened it, his pale fingers tracing lines of text written in an archaic script. "There is a prophecy," he said quietly. Older than this castle. It speaks of a moon chosen, a woman not born of our blood, but called by the moon itself. A maternal protector destined to guard the bloodline when darkness seeks to consume it. Annabelle's breath caught. "You think I think nothing," Ravian interrupted sharply. But Celine spoke for the first time in 3 years the moment you arrived. And those were her exact words. "The moon finally sent you to us." His eyes met hers, burning with intensity. "I do not believe in coincidence, Miss Sinclair. I'm just a woman who got lost in a storm," Annabelle protested, though even as she said it, she felt the lie of it. The warmth in her hands when Celine touched her. "The dream of the woman. Protect my child." "Perhaps," Ravian said, closing the book. "Or perhaps you are exactly what the prophecy promised." He paused. "Either way, you are in danger here." Before she could ask what he meant, heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Captain Drake appeared in the doorway, his expression hard as iron. "Lord Ravian, a word," he said. Then his eyes cut to Annabelle. "Alone." Ravian nodded curtly. "Miss Sinclair, you should return to your chamber." But as Annabelle turned to leave, Drake stepped into her path. "Actually," he said coldly, "I have questions for her." The interrogation happened in a small antechamber off the main hall. Drake stood with his arms crossed, blocking the door, while Annabelle sat stiffly in a wooden chair. Celine had tried to follow, but Drake had shut the door in her face. "Who sent you?" he demanded without preamble. Annabelle blinked. "I told you, the Southern Matrimonial Registry." "I don't believe in convenient mistakes," Drake cut her off. "A bride arrives at the exact moment a prophecy needs fulfilling? A stranger appears, and suddenly the child, who hasn't spoken in 3 years, finds her voice." He leaned forward, his scarred face inches from hers. "You're either a pawn or a player, Miss Sinclair. Which is it?" Anger flared in Annabelle's chest. "I am neither. I am a healer from the southern provinces who was hired as a bride and sent to the wrong location. That is all." "A healer," Drake repeated, skepticism dripping from every word. "Yes," she said firmly. "I trained at the Sisters of Mercy Hospice in Greymoor. I treated fever, set bones, delivered children." Her voice caught, just slightly, on that last word. The memory of her illness rose up, the fever that had ravaged her body, the infection that had stolen her ability to ever bear children of her own. Drake noticed the hesitation. His eyes narrowed. "What aren't you saying?" "Nothing that concerns you," Annabelle replied, lifting her chin. "I came here by accident. I have no designs on this family, no hidden agenda. I only want to leave when the storm allows it." "Do you?" Drake asked quietly. "Because the child doesn't seem to think so." He stepped aside then, opening the door. Celine stood just outside, her small face pressed to the gap, eyes wide with worry. Drake's expression softened, just barely. "The girl has lost enough," he said to Annabelle, his voice low and dangerous. "If you hurt her, prophecy or no prophecy, I will end you myself." Then he was gone, leaving Annabelle trembling in the chair. Celine slipped inside immediately, climbing into Annabelle's lap without invitation, her cold little hands clutching Annabelle's dress. "It's all right, sweetheart," Annabelle whispered, stroking the child's dark hair. "I'm all right." That afternoon, Celine led Annabelle to a small sitting room where art supplies lay scattered across a table: charcoal, parchment, watercolors dried and cracked with age. The child picked up a piece of charcoal and began to draw. Annabelle watched, mesmerized, as the image took shape. A woman in a long dress, arms outstretched. A small girl standing behind her. And looming over them both, a figure made entirely of shadow. Too tall, too wrong, with eyes like burning coals. Celine finished and held it up, her amber eyes serious. Annabelle's blood ran cold. "What is this, Celine?" The child said nothing, only pointed to the woman in the drawing, then to Annabelle. Then she pointed to herself, then to the monster.
"You, me."
"Him. Who is he?" Annabelle whispered. Celine opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, fear flickering across her small face. But that evening, as dusk bled purple across the snowy mountains and Annabelle prepared for bed, Celine appeared in her doorway one last time. The child walked to her slowly, took both of Annabelle's hands in her own cold fingers, and tilted her head up. Her voice, when it came, was barely a breath, fragile and terrified. "He's coming back." Then she was gone, leaving Annabelle alone in the gathering dark with those 3 words echoing like a death knell in her mind. "He's coming back." The words haunted Annabelle through the night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl through the mountains like a wounded beast. Every shadow seemed to move with intent. Every creak of ancient timber sounded like footsteps. When dawn finally broke gray and cold, she found herself drawn to the library again, the one place in the keep that felt almost safe, insulated by centuries of knowledge pressed between leather covers. She didn't expect to find Ravian there. He stood before the dying fire, one hand braced against the mantel, his head bowed. Even from across the room, Annabelle could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the stone, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Lord Ravian?" she said softly. He didn't startle. Perhaps he'd known she was there all along. "You should not be here," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Neither should you, by the look of it," Annabelle replied, moving closer. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't sleep," he said flatly. Then, after a pause, "Not anymore." Annabelle noticed it then. A dark stain seeping through the white shirt at his wrist, half hidden by his coat sleeve. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Let me see." When he didn't move, she added quietly, "I'm a healer, remember? I've treated far worse than whatever you're hiding." For a long moment, he simply stared at her with those ancient crimson eyes. Then, slowly, he extended his arm. Annabelle pushed back his sleeve and found exactly what she'd suspected: a wound, recently reopened, slashed across his wrist. Not deep enough to be fatal, but deep enough to hurt, and old enough to have scarred over once before. "This wasn't an accident," she said, meeting his gaze. Ravian pulled his arm back sharply.
"No."
"It wasn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. "Celine told you he's coming back," Ravian said finally. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then you deserve to know the truth." He moved to the window, staring out at the endless white. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. 3 years ago, I woke at dawn. My wife, Alara, was lying beside me in our bed, dead. Annabelle's breath caught. There was blood, Ravian continued, his hands clenching into fists. On the sheets, on my hands, my mouth. His voice cracked. I remembered nothing, only fragments, the taste of iron, the sound of her heartbeat slowing, and then darkness. "You think you killed her," Annabelle whispered. "I know I did," Ravian said bitterly. "Vampires are not safe creatures, Miss Sinclair. We fight against our nature every moment. And sometimes, when control slips, when blood madness takes hold, we become monsters." He finally looked at her, his eyes blazing with pain. I loved Alara, and I slaughtered her. Is that why you stay away from Celine? His jaw worked. The child looks at me with her mother's eyes. How can I hold her, knowing what these hands have done? How can I call myself her father when I may have stolen her mother? Annabelle moved closer, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. This wound, she said, gesturing to his wrist. You did this to yourself, to punish yourself. I deserve worse. Perhaps, Annabelle said quietly. Or perhaps you deserve the truth before you condemn yourself. She reached for his wrist again, and this time he let her. She cleaned the wound with water from a pitcher, tore strips from her petticoat to bind it. Her hands were steady, practiced, gentle. You're very kind, Ravian said softly, watching her work. To a monster. You're not a monster, Annabelle replied. You're a man drowning in grief and guilt. I know something about that. He studied her face. What do you mean? Annabelle's hands stilled. She'd kept this secret locked away for so long, buried beneath shame and loss. But here, in this haunted place with this broken man, the words came easier than they should have. 5 years ago, I fell ill, she said quietly. A magical infection. Rare, virulent. The healers saved my life, but she swallowed hard. The fever left scars, internal ones. I can never bear children. Ravian's expression softened. That is why you hesitated when Drake questioned you. Yes. Annabelle finished binding his wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. I was supposed to be a bride.
A wife.
A mother, eventually. But I'm broken now. Unfit for the life I was promised. You are not broken, Ravian said with sudden intensity. You are here. You're whole. And Celine sees in you exactly what she needs. Not what you've lost, but what you've survived. Tears burned behind Annabelle's eyes. Before she could respond, the library door opened. Lady Maristra stood in the doorway, her expression grave. Annabelle, she said, I need you to come with me.
Now.
Maristra led her through darkened corridors to a part of the keep Annabelle hadn't yet explored, a wing that felt colder, older, abandoned. They stopped before a sealed door marked with silver symbols. This was Alara's chamber, Maristra said quietly. The place where she died. She pushed the door open. Moonlight spilled through a broken window, illuminating a room frozen in time. A bed stripped bare, a vanity covered in dust, and there, carved into the frost-covered stone floor, 2 sets of footprints. Look closely, Maristra whispered. Annabelle knelt, tracing the prints with her eyes. 2 sets led away from the bed toward the door. But only 1 set returned. Ravian walked to the door that morning, Maristra said. But someone else walked with him, someone who left the room, and never came back. Annabelle's blood turned to ice. He didn't kill her. No, Maristra said, her crimson eyes glinting in the moonlight. Someone else did. Someone who knew how to make it look like blood madness. Someone who wanted Ravian to believe he was the monster. She gripped Annabelle's shoulder. And that someone is still in this castle. A sound echoed through the corridor, distant, barely audible. Scratch. 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 Both women froze. What is that? Annabelle breathed. Maristra's face went pale. Celine's room. They ran. The scratching grew louder as they raced through the keep, their footsteps echoing off stone. When they reached Celine's door, the sound stopped abruptly. Maristra threw the door open. The room was empty. Celine's bed was unmade, her window shut. But there, carved into the wooden doorframe, fresh, deep, deliberate, were claw marks. And beneath them, scratched into the wood in jagged letters. Soon, Annabelle's hands trembled. Where is Celine? Find her, Maristra commanded, her voice sharp with fear. Now. They found Celine in the kitchens, curled beneath a wooden table, her amber eyes wide and glassy with terror. She flew into Annabelle's arms the moment she saw her, trembling violently, her small fingers digging into Annabelle's shoulders like claws. It's all right, sweetheart, Annabelle murmured, holding her close. You're safe now. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. The next morning, Annabelle began her own investigation. If there was a killer hiding within Winterthorn Keep's walls, she would find him. She owed Celine that much. She owed herself that much. Because whether prophecy or coincidence had brought her here, she was part of this now. She started in the forgotten places, the sealed corridors, the abandoned wings where dust lay thick as snow and cobwebs hung like funeral shrouds. Ravian had given her permission, albeit reluctantly, after she'd explained what Maristra had shown her. His face had gone ashen at the news, grief and hope warring in his eyes. "If I didn't kill her," he'd whispered. "You didn't," Annabelle had said firmly. "And we're going to prove it." Now she stood in what appeared to be an old study, its shelves lined with books whose spines had cracked with age. A desk sat in the corner, its surface buried beneath layers of parchment and dust. Annabelle began sorting through the papers, coughing as centuries of neglect rose into the air. Most were mundane: accounts, inventories, correspondence. But then her fingers closed around a leather journal, smaller than the others, hidden beneath a stack of maps. She opened it. The handwriting inside was cramped, frantic, obsessive. Entries dated back 4 years, a year before Alara's death. Day 47. Lady Maristra refuses to teach me the old rituals. She says they are too dangerous, that they require blood sacrifice. She does not understand. The lunar magic in the Winterthorn bloodline is wasted on them. They fear their own power. Annabelle's pulse quickened. She flipped forward. Day 89. I have found the ancient texts she hid from me. The ritual is clear. To siphon the power requires a moonborn child and a conduit. The mother's life force can serve as the bridge. Her hands shook as she read further. Day 102. Tonight. When the moon is dark. When Ravian's control is weakest. They will never know it was me. The journal ended there. Annabelle stared at the final entry, her heart hammering. This was it, the proof. Maristra's apprentice had murdered Alara to steal Celine's power. But the ritual hadn't worked, or he would have taken the child years ago. Which meant he was still waiting, still watching. He's coming back. A sound behind her made Annabelle spin around. The journal clutched to her chest. But the doorway was empty. Only shadows and the faint echo of footsteps retreating down the hall. That night, Annabelle returned to her chamber to find symbols scratched into her door. The same lunar markings she'd seen throughout the keep, but twisted, corrupted. They seemed to writhe in the torchlight, and when she touched them, her fingers came away cold. She slept with a chair wedged against the door. The nightmares found her anyway, visions of shadow figures with burning eyes, of Celine screaming, of blood spreading across snow like spilled wine. She woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, and found Celine standing beside her bed. The child was trembling, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her small hands clutching a tattered blanket. "Did you have a nightmare too?" Annabelle whispered. Celine nodded, then climbed into bed without asking, pressing herself against Annabelle's side. Her presence brought that strange warmth again, chasing away the lingering cold from the dream. "He was in my dream," Celine whispered, her third time speaking, each word precious and terrible. "The Shadow Man. He said he's hungry." Annabelle wrapped her arms around the child, her mind racing. "Listen to me, Celine. Can you feel the magic inside you? The warmth?" Celine nodded against her shoulder. "When you're frightened, that magic gets wild, doesn't it? Like fire spreading." Another nod. "I'm going to teach you something," Annabelle said gently. "Something that helped me when I was sick and scared. We're going to breathe together, and with each breath, you're going to imagine gathering that wild fire into a little ball right here." She pressed her hand to Celine's chest. "Can you try?" For the next hour, Annabelle guided Celine through breathing exercises, slow inhales, measured exhales, visualization techniques she'd learned during her own recovery. Gradually, the child's trembling subsided. The wild glow in her eyes dimmed to something manageable. "Better?" Annabelle asked. "Yes, Miss Annabelle," Celine whispered, and then, so quietly Annabelle almost missed it. "Thank you, Mama." Annabelle's breath caught. The child had said it unconsciously, instinctively, and now looked up with fearful eyes as if expecting rejection. Instead, Annabelle kissed her forehead. "Sleep now, little one. I'll keep you safe." The next morning, Annabelle found Captain Drake in the armory, sharpening a blade with methodical precision. "I found this," she said, holding out the journal. Drake took it, his expression darkening as he read. "Kieran," he said finally, "Maristra's apprentice. He disappeared the night Lady Alara died. We thought he'd fled, consumed by guilt for not protecting her." His jaw clenched. "We were wrong. What happened to him?" No one knows. Maristraw said he'd become obsessed with the old magic, the blood rituals the family had abandoned centuries ago. She expelled him from her tutelage, but he refused to leave the keep. Drake looked up, his gray eyes hard. Then Alara died, and Kieran vanished. We searched for weeks. Found nothing. He's still here, Annabelle said. Hiding. Waiting. For what? For Celine's power to mature, Annabelle replied, remembering the journal entries. He needs her magic at its strongest to complete whatever ritual he started. Drake stood abruptly. I'll inform Lord Ravian. We'll search every... No, Annabelle interrupted. If Kieran knows we're looking, he'll strike before we're ready. We need to draw him out. Using what is bait? Drake demanded. Annabelle met his gaze steadily.
Me.
I'm the moon chosen, remember? If he wants Celine, he'll have to go through me first. Drake studied her for a long moment, then nodded grimly. You're braver than I gave you credit for, Miss Sinclair. That evening, as dusk bled across the mountains, Annabelle stood at her chamber window, watching snow fall in the courtyard below. She was about to turn away, when movement caught her eye. A figure stood in the shadow of the stable, tall, hooded, perfectly still. Watching her, Annabelle's blood ran cold. She blinked, and when her eyes opened again, the figure remained. But his shadow was wrong. Too long, stretching across the snow like spilled ink. Too fluid, moving independently of its caster, reaching toward the keep like grasping fingers. The figure tilted his head, and even from this distance, Annabelle felt the weight of his gaze. Then he smiled, a flash of white in the darkness, and melted backward into shadow, leaving only footprints that, even as she watched, began to fill with falling snow. Annabelle didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window with a fireplace poker across her lap, watching the courtyard until dawn broke pale and gray. The footprints had vanished beneath fresh snow, but she could still feel the weight of that gaze. Hungry, patient, inevitable. By morning, Celine had spiraled into a state of terror Annabelle had never seen. The child wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak, only clutched Annabelle's dress and trembled. Her amber eyes had taken on a wild glow, and twice Annabelle felt heat pulse from the child's skin, magic spiraling out of control. She needs to calm down, Maristraw said grimly, watching Celine shake in Annabelle's arms. If her power becomes too volatile, it will draw him like blood draws sharks. Then I'll take her somewhere quiet, Annabelle said. Away from everyone. Let me try. Ravian looked like he wanted to protest, but Drake placed a hand on his shoulder. Miss Sinclair has managed the child better than any of us. Let her try. So Annabelle bundled Celine in a warm cloak and led her down through the keep's lower corridors, past the kitchens and storage rooms, until they reached the stables, a long stone building that smelled of hay and horses and something almost peaceful. Look, Annabelle said softly, guiding Celine to a stall where a dappled mare stood. Isn't she beautiful? Celine's trembling began to ease. She reached out tentatively to touch the horse's nose, and the mare nickered gently, her breath warm in the cold air. That's it, Annabelle murmured. Just breathe. Remember what I taught you. Gather the fire, hold it close, don't let it scatter. For a moment, everything was still, peaceful, safe. Then the stable doors slammed open. The horses screamed. A figure stood silhouetted against the gray morning light, tall, gaunt, wearing robes that had once been fine but were now tattered and stained. His face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but his hands were visible, covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly silver. Well, a voice rasped from within the hood, cultured but wrong, like music played on broken strings. The moon chosen herself. How convenient. Annabelle stepped in front of Celine, her heart hammering. Stay back. The figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He pushed back his hood, revealing a face that might have once been handsome but was now gaunt and pale as a corpse, eyes sunken and gleaming with madness. Dark veins spider-webbed across his skin, pulsing with corrupted magic. You must be Kieran, Annabelle said, forcing her voice steady. How perceptive, he replied, tilting his head. I've been watching you, watching you play mother to a power you cannot possibly understand. His eyes fixed on Celine, and hunger blazed in them. 3 years I've waited. 3 years for her magic to ripen. And now, finally, the moon sends me a conduit. I won't let you touch her, Annabelle said. You think you can stop me? Kieran's voice rose, echoing through the stables. I killed her mother, a vampire of pure bloodline with E. What are you? A broken human playing at prophecy. He moved with inhuman speed. Annabelle barely had time to shove Celine behind her before Kieran was upon them. His hand lashed out, fingers curled like claws, and Annabelle grabbed a pitchfork from the wall, swinging it desperately. The tines caught his shoulder, tearing through cloth and flesh. Black blood oozed from the wound. Kieran snarled, his handsome face contorting into something monstrous. You dare? He struck her across the face. Annabelle crashed into the stall door, her vision exploding with stars. She tasted blood. Miss Annabelle, Celine screamed. Kieran lunged for the child. Annabelle threw herself forward, catching his robes, dragging him back. He spun, and something flashed in his hand. A blade, curved and cruel, etched with the same corrupted symbols that covered his skin. So be it, he hissed. I'll carve through you if I must. The blade plunged forward. Annabelle tried to dodge, but she was too slow. White-hot pain exploded in her side as the knife sank deep beneath her ribs. She gasped, her legs buckling. No! Celine's voice rang out, raw and terrified. Kieran yanked the blade free, and Annabelle collapsed to the straw-covered ground, blood blooming across her dress like roses in snow. Through dimming vision, she saw him turn toward Celine, saw him reach for the child. The stable doors exploded inward. Ravian materialized like vengeance incarnate, his eyes blazing crimson, fangs bared. He moved faster than thought, crossing the distance in a heartbeat. His hand closed around Kieran's throat, lifting him off the ground. You, Ravian snarled, his voice barely human. You killed her. You made me believe. Kieran choked, clawing at Ravian's grip. The ritual needed her blood. Ravian's hand tightened. There was a sickening crack, and Kieran's eyes went wide, then empty. Ravian dropped the body like refuse and spun toward Annabelle. Annabelle. His voice broke on her name. Captain Drake was there too, sword drawn, kicking Kieran's corpse to ensure it stayed dead. But Annabelle barely registered with him. All she could see was Celine's face hovering above hers, tears streaming down the child's pale cheeks. No, no, no. Celine was whispering, her small hands pressed to Annabelle's wound. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. Annabelle tried to speak, but blood filled her mouth. Ravian dropped to his knees beside them, his hands trembling as they assessed the wound. The blade went deep. She's losing too much blood. Help her. Celine sobbed. You have to help her. I don't know if I can. Mother. Celine screamed, and the word exploded from her with such force that the very air shook. Light blazed from the child's body, pure, silver, blinding, washing over Annabelle like a wave of liquid moonlight. The pain in Annabelle's side began to ebb. She felt warmth spreading through her body, felt her torn flesh begin to knit itself together. The light pulsed with Celine's heartbeat, wild and powerful and desperate. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light faded. Celine collapsed against Annabelle's chest, exhausted, her amber eyes flickering. Celine? Annabelle whispered, her voice hoarse. You're not allowed to die, Celine murmured, so quietly only Annabelle could hear. Mothers aren't allowed to die. Ravian stared at them both, his expression shattered, grief, wonder, and something like hope warring across his face. She called you mother, he breathed, and her power answered. Annabelle looked down at her side. The wound was still there, but no longer fatal, sealed by lunar magic, by a child's desperate love. Get her inside, Drake commanded, before she bleeds out anyway. Ravian lifted Annabelle as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Celine refused to let go, her fingers still tangled in Annabelle's dress. As they left the stables, Annabelle glanced back once at Kieran's corpse, lying in the blood-stained straw. The nightmare was over. But somehow, she knew the real story was only just beginning. For 3 days, Annabelle lay in a fever dream. The wound Celine's magic had sealed still ached like a brand beneath her ribs, and though the child had saved her life, the cost had been steep. Annabelle drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of voices murmuring around her, of cool hands pressing cloths to her forehead, of small fingers gripping hers with desperate strength. When the fever finally broke, she woke to find Ravian sitting beside her bed. He looked haggard, his white hair disheveled, dark circles beneath his crimson eyes, his usual composure cracked and bleeding. When he saw her eyes open, relief crashed across his face like a wave. "Annabelle," he breathed. "Thank the moon." "Celine," she croaked, her throat raw. "Asleep." Finally, "She refused to leave your side for 2 days straight."
His voice softened.
"She's terrified she would lose you." Annabelle closed her eyes. Even that small gesture exhausted her. "I need water." Ravian helped her sit up, held the cup to her lips with a gentleness that made her chest shake. His hands were steady, but she could see the tremor in them when he thought she wasn't looking. Over the following days, as strength slowly returned to her limbs, Annabelle watched. She watched Ravian hover near her door, never quite entering unless summoned, his eyes full of something he wouldn't name. She watched the way he looked at Celine now, no longer with distance and guilt, but with cautious hope, as if he were learning to be a father again. And she watched Celine transform. The child barely left Annabelle's side, chattering in her small voice about everything and nothing, the horses, the snow, a dream she'd had about flying. She called Annabelle Miss Annabelle most of the time, but occasionally, in unguarded moments, that other word would slip out.
Mama.
And each time it did, Annabelle's heart broke a little more, because she could see it now, the family they were becoming. The way Ravian's eyes softened when Celine laughed. The way Celine reached for Annabelle's hand whenever she was frightened. The way Maristra watched them all with knowing satisfaction, as if a prophecy was unfolding exactly as it should. But Annabelle remembered what they didn't know. What she'd confessed to Ravian, but never explained fully. She was barren, broken, unable to give this family what it truly needed, a future, heirs, continuation of the bloodline the prophecies spoke of protecting. Celine was not hers by blood, could never be, and Ravian deserved someone whole, someone who could be a true mother, not just a woman playing at one. The thought crystallized in her mind like ice forming over water. Inevitable, unbearable, necessary. On the 7th night after the attack, when the keep was silent and Celine finally slept in her own bed, Annabelle sat at the small writing desk in her chamber. Her hands trembled as she dipped the quill in ink. "Lord Ravian, the storm has passed. The roads are clear. It is time for me to continue to my intended destination. You and Celine have been gracious hosts, and I am grateful for the shelter you provided. But I was never meant to stay. I was a mistake, a bride sent to the wrong castle, nothing more. Celine is a beautiful child who deserves a mother who can give her everything. I cannot be that person. I cannot give her siblings, cannot secure the future of your bloodline, cannot fulfill whatever prophecy your family believes in. I cannot be a mother. Please tell Celine, I am sorry. Tell her that she is loved, even if not by me in the way she deserves." With gratitude, Annabelle Sinclair. She folded the letter with shaking hands, sealed it with wax, and left it on the desk where Ravian would find it when he came to check on her in the morning, as he did every day now. Then she lay down in bed and wept silently into her pillow, grieving for the family she would never have. Annabelle woke to voices shouting in the corridor. Disoriented, she sat up too quickly, pain flaring in her side. Gray dawn light filtered through her window. She'd slept longer than intended. The letter was gone from her desk. Her door burst open. Ravian stood in the doorway, his face ashen, her letter crumpled in his fist. Behind him, Maristra and Drake crowded into the frame, their expressions tight with alarm. "Where is she?" Ravian demanded, his voice ragged. "Where is who?" Annabelle asked, confusion and dread warring in her chest. "Celine." Ravian's composure shattered completely. "She's gone, Annabelle. She found your letter. She must have come looking for you this morning and found it on your desk. Maristra discovered her room empty an hour ago." Annabelle's blood turned to ice.
No.
"No, she wasn't supposed to. What did you write?" Ravian's voice broke on the question. He thrust the letter toward her, and she saw that it had been torn, as if small fingers had ripped it open desperately. "I was trying to do the right thing," Annabelle whispered, horror closing around her throat. I believed she deserved better than." "Better than you?" Ravian's eyes blazed. "You think that child wants better? She wants you. She has called you mother. She nearly killed herself saving your life. And you are going to leave. I can't give her what she needs." Annabelle shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I can't give you what you need. I'm broken, Ravian. I can't bear children. I can't. None of that matters. Ravian roared, and the windows rattled with the force of his anguish. Don't you understand? She already lost one mother, and now she thinks she's losing another because she believes she wasn't enough. The words hit Annabelle like a physical blow. Oh God, she breathed. Where did she go? Into the mountains, Drake said grimly from the doorway. Her footprints lead north into the forest. Into the storm. What storm? Annabelle said. The skies were clear. Maristra's voice was cold as death. Not anymore. A blizzard came in during the night, the worst we've seen in years. Her crimson eyes fixed on Annabelle. That child is out there in freezing darkness, believing she's been abandoned. Again. Annabelle stumbled toward the door, ignoring the screaming pain in her side. Then what are we waiting for? We have to find her. Ravian caught her arm. When she looked up at him, his face was raw with emotion, anger and fear, and something deeper, something that looked almost like betrayal. If we don't find her, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, it will destroy us all. Then he released her and strode toward the stairs, already shouting orders to Drake. Annabelle stood frozen for one terrible moment, her letter crumpled on the floor, her heart shattering in her chest. I cannot be a mother. Celine had read those words, had believed them, and now she is gone. The blizzard was a living thing, teeth of ice and claws of wind that tore at their cloaks and stole the breath from their lungs. Snow fell so thick that Annabelle could barely see Ravian walking 3 paces ahead of her, his white hair vanishing into the white storm. There, Ravian shouted over the howling wind, pointing toward a faint shimmer in the darkness. Her magic. I can see it. Annabelle squinted through the stinging snow and caught it, a pale silver glow pulsing weakly through the trees, like a dying heartbeat. They pushed forward, fighting through drifts that rose to their knees. The cold was merciless, burrowing into Annabelle's bones despite her cloak and gloves. Her wounded side screamed with every step, but she refused to slow down. Please, she prayed to whatever moon had supposedly chosen her. Please let us find her alive. Ravian moved like a man possessed, his crimson eyes blazing even in the darkness. Annabelle saw the anguish carved into every line of his face, not just for Celine now, but for the memory of her. I wasn't there when Alara died, he said suddenly, his voice nearly lost to the wind. I woke up too late. I couldn't save her. His hands clenched into fists. I won't fail Celine too. I won't. You won't, Annabelle said fiercely. We'll find her. We have to. The silver glow grew brighter, more distinct. They crested a small ridge, and there, in a hollow beneath an ancient oak whose branches clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers, they found her. Celine was curled into a ball at the base of the tree, her small body dusted with snow, her lips blue with cold. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Silver light pulsed weakly from her skin, her magic trying desperately to keep her warm, failing. Celine. Ravian dropped to his knees beside her, gathering her into his arms. Celine, can you hear me? The child's head lolled against his shoulder. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a voice so small and broken it shattered what remained of Annabelle's composure. I ran so you wouldn't have to leave me first. Annabelle fell to her knees in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks.
Oh, sweetheart.
Oh, my darling girl. Celine's amber eyes found hers, dull with cold and sorrow. You said you can't be a mother. You said you can't. I was wrong, Annabelle sobbed, reaching out to cup Celine's frozen face in her hands. I was so wrong. I thought I wasn't enough for you, because I'm broken, because I can't give you brothers or sisters, because I'm just a human who stumbled into your life by accident. You're not broken, Celine whispered, her small voice trembling. You're mine. The words pierced through Annabelle like sunlight through storm clouds. She pulled Celine from Ravian's arms and into her own, holding the child against her chest, wrapping her cloak around them both. I'm yours, Annabelle repeated, pressing her lips to Celine's frozen hair. I'm yours and you're mine, and I was a fool to think that blood mattered more than this. More than us. You won't leave? Celine asked, her voice breaking. You promise? Never, Annabelle whispered. I will never leave you. Not for anything. Not for anyone. You are my daughter, in every way that matters. Do you understand me? You are mine. Celine's small arms wrapped around Annabelle's neck, clinging with desperate strength. Please stay. Mama, please. Always, Annabelle breathed. Always, my darling. Always. Ravian watched them, his expression raw and unguarded. Slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around them both, sheltering them from the wind. His voice was rough when he spoke. We need to get her back to the keep. Now. But as they began to rise, something extraordinary happened. The storm broke. Not gradually, but all at once. The wind dying, the snow ceasing mid-fall, the clouds parting like curtains drawn back by invisible hands. Moonlight poured down through the opening, silver and radiant, bathing the three of them in its glow. Celine's magic flared in response, warming, brightening, wrapping around all three of them like an embrace. The child's eyes glowed amber bright, but no longer with fear or pain, with recognition, with belonging. The moon knows, Celine whispered, wonder in her voice. It knows we're a family now. Annabelle looked up at Ravian and found him staring back at her, his crimson eyes glistening with unshed tears. In that moment, under the blessing of moonlight and magic, something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, a future taking shape. Come, Ravian said softly, lifting Celine into his arms. Let's go home. And as they walked back through the now peaceful forest, the moon watched over them, a family forged not by prophecy or blood, but by choice, sacrifice, and love fierce enough to weather any storm. They returned to Winterthorn Keep as the first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Maristraw and Drake met them at the gates, relief stark on their faces. Thank the moon, Maristraw breathed, touching Celine's cheek as Ravian carried her past. I feared we'd lost her. We nearly did, Ravian said quietly, his eyes finding Annabelle's. But we won't lose her again. Any of us. They settled Celine before the great hearth, wrapping her in blankets until only her small face peeked out. Color was returning to her cheeks, and her amber eyes had regained their brightness. She refused to release Annabelle's hand, even when Maristraw brought hot broth and honey cakes. Drink, little one, Annabelle coaxed gently. You need your strength. Celine obeyed, but kept her gaze fixed on Annabelle the entire time, as if afraid she might vanish like morning mist. Captain Drake stood watch by the door, his usual stoicism cracked by something that almost resembled tenderness. The child has her mother's stubbornness, he said gruffly, running into a blizzard to escape heartbreak. She has her father's courage too, Maristraw added, glancing at Ravian, though perhaps less of his tendency towards self-destruction. Ravian said nothing. He stood apart from them all, staring into the fire, the silver morning ring on his finger catching the light. Evening came soft and clear. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving stars scattered like diamonds across velvet darkness. A full moon rose over the mountains, luminous, watchful, ancient. Celine had finally fallen asleep in Annabelle's arms, exhausted by her ordeal. Annabelle had carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed, sitting beside her until the child's breathing deepened into peaceful slumber. When Annabelle descended the stairs, she found the great hall empty save for one figure. Ravian stood at the window, his profile etched in moonlight. He looked like something carved from marble, beautiful, remote, eternal. But when he turned at her approach, his eyes were achingly human. Walk with me, he asked quietly. They went out into the courtyard together, their breath ghosting white in the cold air. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Above them, the moon watched silent, knowing. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ravian stopped in the center of the courtyard and turned to face her. For 3 years, he began, his voice low and deliberate, I have lived as a ghost, walking through these halls, performing my duties, existing but not living. I convinced myself I was a monster, that I had murdered the woman I loved, that I was too dangerous to hold my own daughter. Ravian, Annabelle started, but he raised a hand. Please, let me finish. He took a breath. I held on to grief and guilt like they were treasures. I wrapped them around myself like armor because if I was a monster, then I didn't have to feel, didn't have to hope, didn't have to risk loving and losing again. His crimson eyes found hers, blazing with intensity. Then you arrived, a bride sent to the wrong castle. and everything I'd built to protect myself began to crumble.
His voice softened.
You looked at my daughter, a vampire child who hadn't spoken in years, and you didn't see a creature or a curse. You saw a little girl who needed love. You gave her that without hesitation, without condition. She made it easy, Annabelle whispered. She has your wife's spirit. Anyone would love her. But not anyone would have stayed, Ravian said. Not anyone would have investigated a murder to prove my innocence. Not anyone would have thrown themselves between Celine and a killer. Not anyone would have let that child call them mother and meant it with their whole heart. He reached up slowly and removed the silver ring from his finger, the mourning ring he'd worn for 3 years like penance. Ilara was my first love, the mother of my child. I will always remember her memory. He held the ring up to the moonlight. But I cannot live in the past anymore. Not when the future is standing before me. Then Ravian Winterthorn, Lord of Winterthorn Keep, ancient vampire and master of this domain, knelt in the snow. Annabelle's breath caught. Annabelle Sinclair, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. You were not summoned by me. You were not chosen by prophecy or politics or arrangement. But you were chosen by the moon, by Celine, and by my own heart, whether I wanted to admit it or not. He held out the ring.
Stay.
Not because prophecy demands it. Not because you feel obligated to a child who loves you. But because we want you. Because I want you. As my partner.
My equal.
The mother of my daughter, and, if you'll have me, my wife. Tears blurred Annabelle's vision. I can't give you more children. I can't give you heirs. Then we will cherish the child we have, Ravian said fiercely. Celine is enough. You are enough. A family is not built on blood alone, Annabelle.
You taught me that.
I'm just a human, she whispered. I'll grow old while you stay young. I'll die while you. Then I will treasure every moment we have, Ravian interrupted. Every year, every day, every heartbeat. I would rather have 30 mortal years with you than an eternity alone. Annabelle looked down at this powerful, ancient being kneeling before her in the snow, offering her not just a ring but a future, a family, a home. Everything she'd thought she'd lost when illness had stolen her dreams. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Ravian. I'll stay. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for saving us. You saved me too, Annabelle replied. A small sound made them both turn. Celine stood in the doorway, wrapped in her blanket, her amber eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. She must have woken and come looking for them. Mama, she called. Papa? Annabelle held out her hand. Come here, sweetheart. Celine ran to them, and Ravian scooped her up, holding her between them. The child's magic pulsed gently, warm, content, home. Are you staying now? Celine asked Annabelle. Forever. Forever, Annabelle promised, kissing her forehead. And we're a family? Celine pressed. A real one? Ravian smiled, the first true smile Annabelle had ever seen on his face. A real one, little star. By moonlight and choice and love. They stood together in the courtyard beneath the full moon, a vampire lord who'd learned to forgive himself, a human woman who'd discovered her purpose, and a child who'd found her voice again. 3 souls who'd been broken, now made whole. Above them, the moon shone bright and clear, bathing Winterthorn Keep in silver light. And for the first time in 3 long years, the ancient fortress felt not like a tomb, but like a home. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not because fate demanded it, but because 3 hearts had chosen each other. And in the end, that choice was the most powerful magic of all.
The end.